I'll talk if you don't mind, because can you hear me in the back?
Yes, we
We
can.
have a problem with people hearing me. Some of you may have missed the nice pictures of me this morning, so let's see the first picture if we can. What right have I got to talk about this? Who am I? Next picture. There we are. Nice little boy. Picture taken over there by the stadium. I was born and bred in Guyana. I was born in public hospital in Providence. Next picture, please. There we are. Went to school at Sacred Heart with a man called Bonnie Ramsey sitting beside me, who then became the Attorney General. My mother's Guyanese, father was English. A very old Guyanese stock. There we are, dressed up in a silly outfit at the YMCA in Thomaslands. Little boy again. I'm showing these pictures. Here's two of my sisters, again in Providence. The house is still there. You call that Greenfield Park these days. So that's where I was until I was 10. And then my father, back a bit, my father was an overseer. I was one of the 4 children. It was idyllic. I mean, it's privilege, of course it was privilege. I was white on the sugar estate. But catching crabs down by the river, privilege, idyllic. So, what do I know about the Guyanese mafia? Forget all of your preconceptions about what mafia means. Let's have a look at what mafia in Britain is used as a gentle term. Prince Charles invented it. I would claim I invented the Guyanese mafia. Previously, we'll disagree. This is a little selection from British newspapers just in the last month. A British writer saying, the Oxford Mafia, why do I criticise it when I'm part of it? Tony Young, the Oxford Mafia. There's an LSE Mafia. There's a Tafia, which is the Welsh version of the Mafia. So forget all your preconceptions about us being pejorative about the Guyanese. So the Guyanese Mafia, just what is it? Well, remember the country emptied in the 60s when my family left. Quite a lot of people went to Britain. The British diaspora is very small. It's somewhere between 20 and 40,000, nobody's quite sure. So it's not huge, but it's produced an amazing number of very well-known people. So some went to the UK, but then the Tories stopped admitting people from the Commonwealth. They actually had a minister who was unofficially called the Minister for Keeping Out Blacks. And they passed 2 immigration acts which stopped the people coming to England. So they came to be forced from Guyana from the pull of the motherland. They came to work in the railways, the tubes, a lot of crap jobs. I mean, some people have done very well. So the push was Guyana and the pull was the motherland. So let's see who they are. In the beginning, the elders. Next one, please. Owen Osley, public servant, head of a council, became chairman of the Commission for Racial Equality, became a sir, is now a lord. He's a crossbench lord, which means he's not Tory or Labour. So he's one of the grand old men. Next person. Bernie Grant. Bernie Grant's man on the left. Yes. Bernie Grant was the first black MP for probably 60 years. The MP for Tottenham, on a firebrand of Guyanese ancestry. The man with him is Nelson Mandela, by the way. Next one. E.R. Brathwaite, who lived in London in the 50s, wrote a very well-known book called To Serve With Love, which became a stage show, a film, and has now become a BBC drama again. And he died last year at the tender age of 104. The writers are important. Queen's College has a lot to answer for. An awful lot of the writers went to Queen's College. An awful lot of the mafia went to Queen's College. So these are people who have had an elite education and have then gone to Britain. So, next person. Wilson Harris. Still alive, 96. Was a land surveyor in the interior of Guyana, and then has turned that into a whole series of novels, which are fairly impenetrable. I've never got beyond page 2. Hands up. Anybody who's ever read a Wilson Harris novel all the way through? David Hines? No? Anybody who can admit to reading a Wilson Harris novel? I send you the challenge. See if you can get to the end of a Wilson Harris novel. Because it's all about mysticism of the forest and all of that. It really is. But He has a nitrous as well. Next one. Michael Adamshex, son of a well-known Georgetown doctor, a playwright. He brought the Caribbean to British TV screens in a series called Empire Road in 1978-79, which starred a man called Norman Beacon.
Yes.
Michael, he died earlier this year after, I think, quite a lot of Alzheimer's and other things. And for him and Bradford, we had an evening of commemoration in the Guyana High Commission, with some very well-known writers coming to talk about it, like Hanif Kureishi and Farouk Tondi and so on, people who've been influenced by them. So still on the elders, here he is, Norman, the most famous Guyanese actor. My favourite story about Norman is going to see him in Herne Hill at 10 one morning. Glass in hand, he said, "What are you having?" I said, "A soft drink, please." Needless to say, Norman came back to Guyana and he died in a rum shop, as I think you probably know, by the post office. So he didn't have a long life. He was easily the most famous black actor. He dominated black acting in British television. 6 years of Desmond's, which is still on in Guyana, probably. Is it still on in Guyana? A great series. But he and his Batman. Every Batman needs a Robin. Next person. Pork pie. Round John Hall. He was the foil. Round John is still alive. He lives in London. He's 85. They live a long life thanks to the National Health Service people. And next, please, Eddie Grant, who brought Guyanese music to Britain and Atlantic Avenue, and had a few hits and go back to
Electric Avenue.
Electric Avenue, thank you very much. And finally, something you've probably never heard of. This is Vishnu Prasad, Professor Vishnu Prasad, who came to England, worked on the railways, and then stopped giving out tickets and started to read them, and did degrees in economics, and ended up as head of the Economic Secretariat, the Commonwealth Secretariat. And when he died late last year, he was amongst the top 1% investors in Britain. He was very, very, very rich. And he used to buy me lunch, so I like him a lot. And the granddaddy. Still alive. Sonny Ramphal. Second and the best known Commonwealth Secretary General. Born in Guyana, still advises the government. So that was the old mafia. And there's the new mafia. Look at that. Next one. New Labour. Labour became government in 1997 with a massive majority, a change in social attitudes, and then the new mafia is born. Trevor Phillips.
Yes.
Is Eric here?
You went to school with him.
Who went to school with him? Trevor is at the centre.
In London.
What? Trevor's the centre. Any spiders web there is, Trevor's at the centre of it. His parents sent him back here to QC, where he studied, and he came back to England to Imperial College. He was a president of the MUS. He was a senior executive in London Weekend Television presenter, and he was chairman of the what was it then called, the Commission for Racial Equality, which changed its name. He was head of the Labour group on London Assembly, and today he's president of the John Lewis partnership, who own John Lewis and Waitrose and stores like that. So if you're looking for the centre of the spider's web, Trevor's usually there. Nice man as well. Next, Lady Amos. Cabinet Minister, first black Cabinet Minister, Under Secretary General of the UN, now is principal of a thing called SOAS at the University of London, a school away from African studies, where she's regularly attacked by students for meeting Israeli ambassadors, things like that. She's a public service. They're all public servants. That's one thing that holds them all together. Another one. The man you'll see this afternoon. David Lammy. Now, he's the MP for Tottenham. So what the Guyanese learnt from the English upper class is inheritance. So when Bernie Grant died, he got a seat. So it's become almost a Guyanese seat. Now Lammy had a few government positions, and if you follow English politics, he's actually played a blinder over the fire in Grenfell Tower, which happened about a month ago. But one of his friends and her mother got incinerated in it. He's actually, on the first weekend, he said this is corporate manslaughter. I'm sure he'll talk a bit more about this afternoon. And this man, not people know, Lord Wahid Ali, the son of a punt trencher from the East Coast and a Trini mother, very rich man, made his fortune in British breakfast television, and then was made a member of the House of Lords by Tony Blair, and got very close to New Labour. Now heads a TV company. He's openly gay, openly Muslim, which is pretty unusual. He's openly Labour. And we go on, next one. Colleen Amos. Colleen Amos was Margaret Thatcher's press secretary, poor woman. And then she went on to work for Prince Charles, where she got to try and avoid PR disasters. He obviously ignored all the advice from them. And she now runs a consultancy. She's one of my, and then another one. Air Commodore David Case, the highest ranking black man in the British Armed Forces, was. He's Hamley Case's cousin. So he's Fred Case's nephew, niece. He's an engineer, came to England, educated in England, went to Belfast, studied aeronautical engineering, and now he's retired from the Air Force and he builds fighters in Germany, whatever the Eurofighters called. He builds those. And this man, who would be hard pushed to admit in Guyanese, Rampakash. His father's Guyanese. He's England batting coach, and he also won Strictly Come Dancing, won Dancing with the Stars. But you'd be hard pushed to get him to admit in Guyanese. My friend, Professor Davide, Professor of Literature at Warwick, multi-Guyana Prize winner. He's a mainstay of the Yesu Prasad Centre, still at Warwick. Comes back regularly, former ambassador to China, spent 5 years as Guyana ambassador to China, is now back living in sunny Kingston. He is also at the centre of most fighters' webs. And my other friend, I only have two friends, Clem Ciceran, who is a great historian. If you have to buy one book, buy Clem's book on Booker, on Jock Campbell. It is a superb book, because what it does is it rises above class and colour in Guyana and treats Jock Campbell seriously. Clem is a historian of cricket, is writing a critical biography of Eddie Jagan. That will go down well in Guyana, and is an emeritus professor. And one of the advantages of exposing the matter, and I did as well. There's one more to come. Oh yes, where is he? Keith? You here, Keith? Is Keith here? Flautist, Keith Waite. And one of the things about exposing all of these people, which I did ruthlessly in Islamic News, they actually have their own book, which is called Guyanese Achievers, because the author was too timid to call it the Guyanese Mafia. You want to call it the Guyanese Achievers, I don't know why. You get to meet unknown Mafia members, so let's move on. This man, nobody knows who he is, Sir Dexter Hutt, headmaster of many schools in Birmingham, the schools in Hastings. He's a boy from Mackenzie. He's now retired, I think, Dexter. And this woman, Cynthia Pine, who is probably the leading dental educator in Britain, is head of the dental school in London. Lived here for 2 or 3 years when she was young, because her father brought her back here because he thought it would do her some good. And this man, Raj Prasad, the son of Vishnu Prasad, who for a while became the best known psychiatrist in Britain. And then that Icarus flew too close to the sun, and he burnt his books. So he was found guilty of plagiarism. So he's now a private psychiatrist. He really was the best known person in Britain. So I haven't got much more to do. And this man, John Agard, new Mafia, Queen's Poetry Medal, very well known poet. He's on the national curriculum in Britain, as is that of his wife, Grace Nichols. So you see the Mafia goes on and on and on. So what do you learn from their rise? Next slide. The importance of education, people were talking about this morning, there and here. The importance of having a committed family, pushy families. Valerie Amos' father, when she went home with a history mark of 96%. said, where's the other 4%? The importance of public service, which a lot of them came up through, and taking advantage of the opportunities. Very quickly, David Dabney and I sat in the Tower Hotel in 2000 and said, why don't we have some awards in Britain called the Guyanese Awards? They were held in Croydon, and it dug out lots more Guyanese, 40 in total. They were taken over by the London High Commission, Michael here, rather than Michael here, no. And next one, that'll do. It fell into disrepair. Ego, sloth, and much more, in a very Guyanese way. The High Commission took it over and ran it to the ground. Sadly. The current High Commissioner is going to resurrect them, so it's more due in 2018. And this lady, some of you may have seen this morning, the most famous black woman in Britain at the moment, the most famous Guyanese, Gina Miller, who took the government to court and won. Pretty good. Rich, philanthropist, and loved to get her own way. So there, next one. So there we are. Guyana's gone a long way in the UK.
Thank you, John. I'm sure you'll have questions at the end. Let's move on to Rosalind, who...
Okay, so my presentation is entitled Caribbean Families Preparation for Migration to the United States, a critical dimension of the diaspora experience. Let's go to slide 4. And I want to just give you a quick background piece on, on where this is coming from. This actually is a spin-off of my phenomenological study done for my dissertation that looked at the lived experience of counselors working with English-speaking Caribbean immigrant parents who use physical discipline with their children. Now, this presentation will look at two perspectives of English-speaking Caribbean families, preparedness for migration. Go to slide 2. And I will cover here considerations of the home country, immigrant parenting practices, what is child abuse, the role of cultural competence and cultural sensitivity, diaspora engagement, conclusions, recommendations, references, I will pass, and acknowledgement, I will pass. So, if you can catch up with me on slide 6. The two perspectives are, one is coming from the family. I will look at the families coming from their home country, and the other is looking at the work of the counselors who are working with families in the host country. Now, in the United States, the use of physical discipline has the potential of putting the immigrant parent at risk of arrest charges and or incarceration. A parent faces legal ramifications when charged with physical abuse of a child. Usually an investigation is launched when an individual makes a phone call to report that a child is abused. And this is the official way that child abuse is reported in the United States. A call is made, and then follow through happens from that call. The initial part of the investigation involves the police department in New York City Children's Services. What happens is, when a 911 call, which is an emergency call, is made, it goes straight to the police. The police, once it involves a child, there's a connection to the governing body of ACS that looks after the well-being of children. So that connection is made right away, and you can see an investigation starts almost immediately. In some situations, the child is temporarily removed and placed in the custody of a family member while the case is being investigated. The reunion of the parent and child is dependent on the parent's compliance with mandated guidelines given by the governing body, which would be the New York City Children's Services and or the court. In some in some situations, the child services agency can work as the court in terms of making that determination of where that child can be. In most situations, though, the court makes that decision. In other situations, the parent is arrested and charged with physical abuse of the child, and a judge determines whether the child is placed in permanent custody of a family member or foster parent, leading to family separation. Now, I'll tell you where all of this is leading and where we come in soon, so bear with me. The problem. Now, when I did my study, the problem was that there's limited information that addresses English-speaking Caribbean immigrants, generally speaking. Now, it is a problem because if the problem is not studied, if the problem is not understood, there will not be appropriate interventions to address the problem. As a result, there are many English-speaking Caribbean immigrant families involved in the legal system facing accusations and charges of child abuse as it relates to the use of physical discipline. Now, I'm saying physical discipline. In Guyana, we talk about beating children, right? So I'm slowly making that connection. The phenomenological study that I did had participants who were counselors working with English-speaking Caribbean immigrant parents who use physical discipline with their children. And this research actually added to the current literature about counselors' work with the immigrant population. I'll try and speak in fast forward because this is 20 minutes of presentation I have, and I know that I have 15 minutes. But what I wanted to plug there is that initially I wanted to study the actual parents who use physical discipline with their children. And as I got closer to going to the IRB, the governing body that approved this research, I was reminded that because I am a licensed social worker, which equates to a mandated reporter, were I to interview those parents, I have to turn them in. Could you imagine that? So I had to go the other way around and look at the experiences of those counselors who work with the families that abuse their children. The funny thing about this study that I did was, it was a very small sample of 10. 8 of them were of Caribbean ancestry, and 2 were of Caribbean parents. So the 2 understood where the beating and all of that came from, when the other 8 said, I was beat. Now, we'll get to that in a minute. Thinking of you yourself being beaten as a child, being raised that way, and you're working with individuals, you're working with parents now who are in the legal system because they have been beating their children. Now, additionally, it offers a template, my study, for the prospective studies, as this is the first study to address the phenomenon of the lived experience of counselors working with English-speaking Caribbean immigrant parents who use physical discipline with their children. There were 3 themes that emerged from the study. One was the counselor's knowledge of physical discipline. The other was counselor's perspective of physical discipline, and counselor's use of self. Now, of those 3 themes, each of them had sub-themes of their own. The study recognized the role that data played in the expansion and deepening of counselors' understanding of the work done with English-speaking Caribbean immigrant parents who use physical discipline with their children. It also offered exploratory opportunities for researchers to address the phenomenon. It highlighted the visibility of counselors' work with the specialized and marginalized populations such as immigrants, given the migratory process is an ongoing one in the United States. There were 4 practical implications of the study, but the one that I will focus on is the last one that addresses a place for the stakeholders on the international platform. And I posited that international personnel are in a position to pay attention to parenting practices and the use of physical discipline in the United States. What my implication here is that once we recognize that families are about to migrate, it's important that we prepare them for parenting in the United States so that they don't become as statistics in dealing with the legal system because of the way they have misunderstood parenting in the United States. Parenting done here in Guyana is different from the way that parenting is done in the United States. I'm focusing specifically on the way that physical discipline is handled. These personnel can be informants to parents and families during the preparation for migration to the United States. This way, by the time immigrant parents and families arrive in the United States, they are informed and educated about expectations of them and the impact of using physical discipline practices. Bearing this in mind, there are laws that influence the immigrant parents' decision to refrain from using physical discipline practices in the United States. In some ways, this speaks to the involvement of the diaspora. I mentioned there is a dearth of literature. I'm emphasizing here that preparedness for migration is definitely one of them. Based on this, many clinicians lack the relevant training and tools needed to effectively treat immigrant families accused of abuse and neglect. I'm talking here to the research gaps that really says that because no proper studies have been done, there is that dearth in information. Next one. Considerations for the home country has a role to, is that the home country has to play a role in preparing the families. This is not to take away from parenting practices in the home country, but a way of getting parents prepared for dealing with the lifestyle. A few researchers talked about immigrants may not experience challenges they may experience challenges in adapting to changes in the language of food, customs, climate, food availability of social support and other factors. And this is very important when counselors are working with those individuals. These challenges amplify the immigrants' families' lack of preparedness for migration. It is pertinent that the host country recognizes its role in preparing prospective immigrant parents and families for migration. In the migratory process, they bring their customs. These are the parents, and physical discipline is one of them. Child abuse is learned. It's a way that we learn from our parents to raise our children. In order to adhere to the laws, it's important that families understand what is child abuse and how it's viewed in the United States. It is specifically an integral aspect of migration for parents and families to understand what child abuse is. Child abuse involves serious injuries that can be seen to the eyes, the head, the body, bruises, cuts, burns, scrap marks, human bite marks, cigarette burns, or impressions of instruments. And I've added the piece of slapping, pinching, beating, flogging, hitting a child with an object such as a belt, a switch, a broomstick, shoes, cooking utensils. We know of those. I'm emphasizing here the competence of the cultural competency and sensitivity of the counselors who work with these families. It's important that they know it, and most of them lack that. No, I'm emphasizing that the diaspora engagement is very, very important. I am suggesting that local ministries dealing with children and family service engage and collaborate with the embassies of the United States in the respective countries. This gesture, yes, I'm finishing up. This gesture would foster a relationship between the ministries and the embassies. The trust of the relationship would be that the national government conveys interest in and understanding of the need to prepare families for migration, while the embassies provide information as in the form of this pamphlet, kind of, sort of, please take it and pass the other. There are 6 of them going around, so I would like to get them. I'm working on this. Please take one and pass it around so that you can see. And this collaboration has the potential to raise the embassy's awareness of English-speaking Caribbean governments' acknowledgement of the importance of preparing prospective immigrant families for migration, thus decreasing the number of immigrant parents likely to be involved in the legal system due to accusations or charges of child abuse due to the use of physical discipline. And here is my conclusion. It addressed the recognition of need for immigrant families' preparation for migration, the collaboration between national government and the United States Embassy in the English-speaking Caribbean is pivotal to this realization. And I am saying the importance of the diaspora engagement once families have migrated and begun their acculturation process is just as important. Ultimately, it is likely that immigrant parents and families will be less likely to be involved in the legal system because of their use of physical discipline as a parenting tool. In essence, what I'm saying is, once the governing bodies on the ground here, I think it's Ministry of Social Protection or Ministry of Human Services, get wind of that, folks might be ready for migration, it's important that they begin to talk about how discipline is happening, maybe even before, in addition to doing a handshake with the embassy in awakening the embassy to the likeness that some education needs to come from them. Some education needs to come from them in terms of how we prepare our parents for migration and we set them up because of the cultural differences and the cultural passions. Thank you very much.
Until the end, we have one more presenter, Dr. David Hines, who will talk about the integrated diaspora policy and inclusion in local politics. Dr. Hines.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm a little bit out of use diaspora, unfortunately, to mean those who left and are not a part of. And so the first thing I want to do is to throw that out. We do have a culture of fragmentation in Guyana and the Caribbean right here. People who live in the interior, we call them bush people and all of that. They're outside of us. We coastlanders are here and we treat them in the same way as we treat the outsider diaspora. So I just want to throw that out. The other thing I wish to start with is to point out that those of us who live at home, we live physically here and we take the emotional meaning of Guyana for granted. And for those who live outside that are not physical, that emotional meaning of Guyana comes to the fore, and in some ways are expressed much more deeply than those who live at home. I want to say that one of the things that we've been guilty here in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean is the way we think about people who live overseas, or what we call the diaspora. We have not really shaped an integrative worldview, an ideological view of the diaspora and its meaning to us. And I would like to throw that out as one of the first things that must underlie any diasporan policy. It has to begin with a worldview of what diaspora is. Is diaspora part of us? Is it part of the nation? Or is the diaspora outside of us? Our conceptualization of what diaspora is, I think, is important in terms of beginning this whole question of a diaspora policy. We make the mistakes often to believe that we can craft policy without thought. And I understand that we live in a culture that we sometimes are impatient with thinking. But if those who were enslaved didn't think about freedom, they couldn't craft the ethos of freedom that eventually got them out of that plantation. So we have to embrace the notion of thinking things through and have this underlying and overarching idea of what we're talking about. And if we craft that overarching ideology, that overarching idea of what is diaspora, then what flows from that is a narrative of what diaspora is. A narrative is important because often if we're trying to tell the nation something, we have to tell them a story. We have to tell them a narrative. You know, I don't want to say sell them a narrative because I don't think people often like salesmen and saleswomen when it comes to very important ideas. But we have to have the nation buy in to a narrative of Guyanese. What is a Guyanese? What is a Guyanese? Is Guyanese a civic construct? Meaning those who live here in this physical space and vote and pay taxes? Or is Guyanese a broader construct that includes the cultural Guyanese in addition to the civic Guyanese? Those who are not physically here, but are emotional part of what makes the Guyanese tapestry alive. John walked us through the Guyanese mafia. The world knows about Guyana often because Guyanese go to far places in the world and back for Guyana. And every time they do something, they're telling the rest of the world of our story and reminding the rest of the world that we exist. Ivan van Sortima, they came before Columbus, changed the way we think about world history. Walter Rodney's How Europe Developed Africa changed the way we talked about African history. And they're Guyanese, all right? And so I'm saying all of that to say that as Guyanese move around the world, they are helping to shape what we at home call this Guyana. So are we constructing a Guyana that is civic, or are we constructing a Guyana that goes beyond civic to include the cultural? If we accept, as I'm arguing, that we should have a broad and integrative meaning of what Guyana should mean, then it means that there's some things that will flow from that. The first thing I think that will flow from that, or should flow from that, is an integrative policy. I think we should move away from a diaspora policy and talk about a national policy that includes the diaspora as an integral part. And so I'm talking about changing language, changing nomenclature. Right? I've heard a lot about the diaspora policy during this conference, and I'm in sympathy because I think that's where we start. But I'm urging here that we go beyond that and not restrict ourselves and narrow ourselves to a diaspora policy. To talk about a Guyana policy as we move deeper into the 21st century that includes as an integral part Guyanese who are dispersed around the world for different reasons. And so that's the first thing I want to say that will flow from this narrative and this ideology of what the diaspora is. The second thing is that we have to begin to think about legislation. We know that the Constitution defines who is a Guyanese, but I think we have to move beyond that now and begin to take legislative measures to talk about and to create this new Guyana that we're talking about. And this new Guyana that includes the diaspora that we're talking about becomes imperative in the world that we are living in. You know, the Calypsonian David Rudder said we live in a world that don't need islands no more. And Guyana can ill afford to be an island. And I'm talking here not about island in the physical sense, but in the larger global sense. Whether we like it or not, we are swallowed up by the globalization that has taken hold of the world. And as we have done before in our history, we have to continue to try to make sense of the world we're living in and try to see how we can fit into that world and to make ourselves viable. And so there is the challenge of this world. You know, oil is coming in 3 years. And it makes Guyana a focal point of global policy and global politics. People are already beginning to talk that the oil find there will shape how the United States of America deal with the rest of the world. They're arguing that the US may well see our oil find as a way of disintegrating itself from the Middle East and dependence on the Middle East. And so what that does, it brings us into the global sphere. Do we here at home with a population that is not growing, and therefore our skill base that is not growing, are we prepared, those of us who are here in Guyana, are we prepared for this challenge in the 20th century? Or are we going to include the rest of the diaspora, the rest of the nation that is in the diaspora in this defense of oil? Because the coming of oil will call upon us to defend ourselves because we have a giant. And when giants come, they're not coming to give you something, they're coming to take what you get, and you have to defend yourself. And so therefore this new Guyana that I'm talking about is a form of defense, global defense. All the economic capital and education capital and technical skills that Guyanese have abroad will have to be brought to bear in our defense of our patrimony, because that is going to be very, very important. Of course, we have to craft policy to have Guyanese here, and I notice my time is almost up. So I want to talk about two things, or recommend two things as a start. I myself have been thinking these things through, so they're not definitive. I've heard talk about the Ministry of the Diaspora. I would want to go beyond that and to say every ministry of government should have a department of the diaspora. And I'm sorry if I am going against the grain, because, but I think we have to begin to think about that. Because if you talk about a ministry of the diaspora, you still talk about them and us. And if you talk about and integrate the diaspora into all of the ministries, whether it be education or public infrastructure, or for God's sake, the one that is very much in our minds right now, public security, then I think we will go a long way towards integrating those who are not physically here. And you know, these are not the days when you go away and you take 10 days to come back. I was talking to a friend last night, he said, I come here for funeral, and I'm coming back next week for Charlie wedding. People are traveling sometimes 2-3 times a month and coming here, you know, so the whole notion of people being away and so we have to change that because times are changing and patterns are changing, and we have to bring our policies updated with that. Insofar as we have our embassies abroad, I think there should be a section of the embassy that deals specifically with the question of integrating those who are overseas into the fabric of Guyana. So that the embassy must be more than doing the passporting and all of that kind of thing. It must become the hub of integration of Guyanese into the larger tapestry. And the second thing I would like to propose, and is going to be extremely controversial, propose something that we did a long time ago, became discredited. I myself was an extreme critic of it, and that is overseas voting. I think the time has come for us to reconsider the notion of overseas voting, to bring Guyanese more into it. People who are abroad physically, of course, will need incentives. You know, we tell them, come back and invest your money. Well, human beings don't function like that. When I come back and invest my money, do I have ownership of the political economy of this country? I therefore propose that we think about reintroducing overseas voting. And I know that it is going to be a very painful debate to have, but I think it is worth it. Countries around the world have been doing it. My own proposal is that I hear that you all don't pay taxes, you all don't do this, you all don't do that. And so perhaps we can start with a formula where, for example, 2 overseas votes or 3 overseas votes are worth 1 vote of people in Guyana as a start. And I'm throwing that out as a formula that we can consider. Because one has to take into consideration that there are people who have legitimate arguments that why should their vote be worth the same of the other votes? So as I'm making that proposal, I'm bearing that in mind as a first step towards the integration into overseas voting. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we have lots of questions for all 3 of these presenters. We'll take the first 5.
These areas. It is possible, it's a fairly limited, easy thing to do. And if we do that, it means we are doing what we most of us don't do. Pass on to our parents, our children, that interest and that love for Guyana. We need to do it. When we speak about diaspora, we are condemning our children born overseas of not even wanting to hear the word Guyana. So, as part of diaspora, I hope that we'll include this as part of our consideration.
Let me thank the good lady for evoking memories of a project I worked on for my undergraduate degree that had to do with instituting or setting up in New York what I called Millennium Hall, which was a proposal of mine to orient Guyanese to the life in New York and overseas, providing them with a package of information and orientation. So thank you for the memories. My comment is that I think we, in the context of doing away with our old-time parenting style, is that I do not hear a proposal for filling that vacuum from your study. And I think that that is crucial. I do not think that we can deprive a traditional Guyanese parent of their methodologies for parenting without providing an appropriate, both in volume as well as impact, an appropriate solution or replacement for that. It is important, it is crucial that parents maintain a parenting posture for children. And if we succumb to the tried out ways of the United States and take that away from our Guyanese, especially if the family is just immigrating to the US, you take away how they know to speak to their progeny. And I've seen, for example, in churches, you cannot match the children to their parents because they go crazy. I mean, this is new freedom. This is called 911 on your parent. And I defy anyone, any policy, any politician, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, anyone, to deprive me of my parenting posture. I do not parent by backslap or anything, but I just say that it is my right to parent. And I will parent to prevent others from parenting my child.
Listen, I'm Guyanese. I was beat. I was beaten. I get enough licks. You know, so in some ways, what I'm saying the point that I'm making is it's not so much with doing away with the parenting that has made you, because one of the things that came out in the study was even the counselors were sharing with these individuals, hey, I got beat. I understand the impact because look who I am. And the parents were saying similar things. So it's a matter of how differently can you work with what you have without encountering the system. So that is the piece that it's there. It's not saying that cut it off, get rid of it, this is all automatically you become an American parent. It's none of that, because our customs and traditions come with us. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on where we're postured, you know, we have to use some of those skills.
Awesome. Permits me to marry your proposal with that of Dr. Hines, if you don't mind. And may I say that I'm Bridget Hines? Thank you. I'll claim any kind of ritual. 6 degrees of separation from anyone. Very quickly. I mean, I enjoyed the presentations very well, but may I caution us to begin both orientations here in Guyana, yes, and not politicize it for, again, we're doing the same thing for the diaspora. Right. If anything that we need to talk, let's talk it here and draw those folk who travel 3 times a month back home to hear it. Right. Don't go out there with a message. Stay, let them come here and hear it. Why not? You know, so that when we speak about integrating the diaspora in every ministry, the one comment that I would make, and I'm so glad that the Vice Chancellor is here right now, is that I feel a sense of siloism within the, or between, or associated with the ministries. I don't hear that integrative posture, that motivation to get my education into public health and public health part. And we're all living one life, and everything has to do with that whole human being. So the integration VC is what I think we notice that lacks most here. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, hello, in a fantasy dystopian land in this room. It's a total fantasy. You go to America, do you drive on the left or the right? Simple as that. So you go to America, they have laws, you obey them. That full stop, to the court. As to David is going back to the future. This dystopia of overseas voting. Right. You must be joking, David. You must be kidding. Mr. Burnham, this donkey voted in London. Come on. Do not go that way.
60 years ago.
It doesn't matter. It was wrong then, it will be wrong now.
We disagree on that.
All right. Next
Thank you for the presentation. Idea of wholeness. 2 points. First, I wanted your comment in terms of whether the idea of the civic Guyanese is necessarily in conflict with the cultural Guyanese. I think you need both, because even with the brain drain, you also have the brawn drain. So we still need those who are here, and the concept of the state is still premised on those who are here. And secondly, you have 2 proposals. They seem to go more towards, in terms of building that identity and integrative approach, more to the instrumental aspects of it, you know, ministry, whatever. I'd be interested in your comments in terms of the elements that would essentially contribute, you know, the psychical aspect, and so to contribute that sense of wholeness. Because building a national identity is not necessarily, you know, just something for Guyana. It is something that is known. You go through as a process as you grow as a nation. So I'd be interested, and I think you have a lot of expertise in this area in terms of coming to that sense of wholeness, which I thought was the direction you would have gone. Thank you.
Before David responds, one more question.
Thank you. I'm Melanie Smith, and I think it's important. John, when you were talking about the Guyanese living over there, my heart was beating with pride, and I wish that there were those in Canada and United States who do the similar thing, because it really is a point of pride. Your presentation on the need for changes to parenting and preparing parents culturally for living abroad is also essential. And David, you've got some, as the previous questioner asked, some proposals that I think are contentious, as you tend to be, but some important dialogue. And my question for all of you goes back to a point that my compatriot Paul Tennessee here said yesterday when he talked about the 3 C's, which is coherence, coordination, and cooperation. How do we take what you have brought into this room and put in place some sort of a coherent framework that's coordinated so that we can actually benefit and see some tangible results for those of us at home and those living abroad?
Can I start an answer on that? The diaspora, you must realize, is not one color. It's not black, it's not brown, it's Portuguese, Chinese, and my color as well. You need to accept that they have a link. Whether you like them or not, they have a link. And quite often, they have a lot of money as well. Right? If you were to exploit the Chinese diaspora in Toronto, the money would come flowing. So get away from race, get away from the idea that there's a greater Guyana. It's nonsense. People left for a reason. They didn't leave because they wanted to come back. They left for a reason. They left for economic reasons and social reasons, emotional reasons. They're not going to come back, but they have good feelings. So don't think of it as a greater Guyana. Don't think of it. Voting is just such nonsense. I mean, I found it hard to believe my ears, David.
So I'll take a crack at your question. I think we have to acknowledge that migration is a continued process. And one of the important reasons that individuals leave or migrate is to have a better life, whatever that better life means. So we'll have that going. With that consideration, in terms of the 3 C's, cohesion, coordination, and cooperation, I think it would be important and beneficial if the powers that be, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Human Services, the embassies, even our consulate in the US, get involved in coming up with some kind of tool. My suggestion is that pamphlet that's going around. That's a start in terms of educating parents before they leave. And I'm using that pamphlet that I sent around, and please, I need to get it back because I'm working on it still. It's not completed. There are 6 of them. I'm hoping that I can share this pamphlet with the ministries and also the embassies, and to some point, even the UN, get the UN to buy in, because you know what? We can't deny the fact that immigrants play a very important role in the fabrics of the country of the United States. I'm not talking about the United States specifically. So I think that's where the 3 C's can come in, if we can all come together, put our heads together, and really work on coming up with a tool to prepare our parents and families for migration.
Now I know there are other questions. Time is up. I was given.
Explore ideas. I understand John's passion, and I just want to say that I live that history must not be a deterrent and a barrier to the future. It must be a teacher for the future. So I just want to leave that. Thank you.